Beneath the misty alleys of ancient Europe, where dim streetlights whisper silent tales, a black cat with mysterious emerald eyes roams. It belongs to no one, yet it guides the lost, those wandering souls adrift in the cold rain and darkness. This is the story of Elias, a young artist in search of inspiration, and his strange journey through distant cities, where a cat named Leo becomes a beacon in the fog, leading him to unexpected fates and secrets yet to be revealed. Chapter 1: The Night of the Lost. The rain fell relentlessly upon the cobblestone streets of Paris, turning the city of light into a hazy painting blurred by mist. Elias Rossi, a 27-year-old painter from Florence, Italy, trudged through the narrow alleys, his soaked coat clinging tightly to him. He had come to Paris in hopes of finding new inspiration after months of creative stagnation, but everything quickly became a disaster. His suitcase filled with art supplies had been lost at the train station, his paper map was smudged and unreadable from the rain, and his smartphone, his last hope, had run out of battery 2 hours ago. Elias stopped under an old awning, where a dim streetlight cast a weak glow onto the sidewalk. He sat down, hugging his trembling hands for warmth, murmuring to himself, "Just make it through tonight, and I'll find my way." But deep down, he knew it wouldn't be that simple. Paris at night was a labyrinth for a stranger like him. Suddenly, from the shadows of the opposite alley, a small black cat emerged. Its sleek fur shimmered under the light, and its emerald eyes gleamed like twin gemstones, staring directly at Elias. The cat let out a soft meow, its voice echoing in the quiet night, then turned and walked away, its tail flicking lightly as if beckoning him to follow. Elias hesitated. "Just a stray cat," he muttered, but there was something strange about its gaze, something almost inviting. With no better option, he stood up, rubbed his hands together for warmth, and stepped into the night, following the cat. Chapter 2: A Mysterious Journey. The cat led Elias through winding alleys he had never seen on any map. The sound of his footsteps on the wet stone mixed with the rhythmic patter of raindrops. They passed a forgotten little square, where an old fountain still gurgled, though its water was murky and covered in green moss. He caught a glimpse of light from a small bakery, its fogged-up windows releasing the sweet scent of freshly baked bread. Elias considered stopping to ask for directions, but the cat turned back, letting out a short, urgent meow, and he felt compelled to follow. The journey lasted longer than he expected. They crossed small stone bridges over the branches of the Seine, past ivy-covered walls, and even an old wooden door, from which Elias swore he heard whispers inside. Doubt began to creep into his mind. How can a cat possibly know the way? He wondered, but the cat's glowing eyes seemed to pierce through the mist, leading him with an uncanny confidence. Finally, they arrived at a small house nestled by the Seine. Its red brick walls were worn by time, its windows clouded with age, and a cluster of withered lavenders sat by the doorstep. The cat sat down, letting out a long, resonant meow, and with a creaking sound, the wooden door swung open. Elias stiffened, taking a step back, but the cat simply gazed up at him as if to say, "Don't be afraid." Chapter 3: Madame Claire. From the darkness of the house, an old woman stepped forward. Her hair, white as snow, was loosely tied at the nape of her neck. Her face was lined with wrinkles, yet her eyes shone with a sharp, intelligent light. She wore a long woolen cloak and held an oil lamp that cast a warm glow. "Has Leo brought another guest?" she said, her voice low and gentle. She glanced at the cat before shifting her gaze to Elias. "Come inside, you look like you're freezing to death." Elias hesitated, but the cold and hunger left him with no choice. As he stepped inside, he immediately felt the warmth radiating from the fireplace in the corner. The house was small but cozy, its walls covered with paintings, scenes of Paris, portraits of people, and strangely, familiar green feline eyes staring back at him. The old woman introduced herself as Madame Claire, a once famous painter who now lived in solitude. She handed him a dry towel, a steaming cup of mint tea, and a plate of buttered toast. "You're the third one this month that Leo has brought home," Madame Claire said as she settled into a worn armchair across from Elias. "He has a talent for finding lost souls." Elias glanced at the cat, now curled up beside the fire, its eyes half closed, and began to recount his story, his journey to Paris, the lost suitcase, the endless rain. Madame Claire listened, her gaze twinkling as if recalling something long past. "Leo isn't just any cat," she murmured. "He chooses those who need help, and this time, it's you." That night, Elias slept on an old sofa, the sound of rain outside lulling him into dreams of shadowy alleys and mysterious green eyes. Chapter 4: Lessons by the River. The next morning, faint sunlight filtered through the mist, reflecting off the shimmering waters of the Seine. Elias intended to leave, to search for his lost suitcase and continue his journey, but Madame Claire stopped him. "You're a painter, aren't you? Before you go, paint something. Paris isn't just about towers and grand avenues, it's also about the hidden corners you've yet to see." She led him to a room at the back of the house, where dozens of paintings were stacked against the walls, masterpieces capturing light, shadow, and raw emotion. Elias stood speechless. Madame Claire's talent surpassed anything he had ever dreamed of. She handed him an old set of brushes and a blank canvas. "Paint," she said. "Let me see how you see Paris." Elias stayed. He began painting the things etched in his memory, the dim glow of streetlights, the glistening raindrops, and the silhouette of a black cat. Madame Claire watched, occasionally guiding him on mixing colors to capture the city's hazy light, or using brushstrokes to convey emotion. Leo was always there. Sometimes, he stretched lazily on the windowsill, watching Elias work. Other times, he led him to the riverbank to admire the sunset. One evening, as Elias sat by the Seine, frustrated that his painting didn't match his vision, Leo leaped onto his lap, let out a soft purr, and nuzzled his hand. Elias smiled, feeling as if the cat was comforting him. "Do you really understand me, Leo?" he asked. Leo merely yawned, his emerald eyes gleaming under the golden twilight. Chapter 5: The Painting Under the Streetlight. After a week with Madame Claire, Elias completed his first painting in Paris. It depicted Leo standing under a streetlight, his emerald green eyes glowing through the rain, with the misty alleyway where Elias had first gotten lost as the background. He used dark tones to create depth, highlighting the golden glow from the streetlight and a hint of green from the cat's eyes. When Madame Claire looked at the painting, she remained silent for a long moment before smiling. "You've found your inspiration," she said. "Paris is not just a place to paint, but a place to feel." That night by the fireplace, she told him more about Leo. "He came to me 10 years ago, also on a rainy night. I had just lost my husband, lost my faith in art. Then Leo appeared, leading me to those who needed me, and whom I needed." Elias asked. "What is Leo? A spirit?" Madame Claire chuckled softly. "Perhaps. Or maybe just a special cat. But I believe he has his own purpose." Elias looked at Leo, now sprawled out on the rug, and wondered if this cat had truly led him here for some greater reason. Chapter 6: The Secret by the Seine. The next day, a strange man knocked on Madame Claire's door. He was tall and slender, wearing a long black coat, his voice deep and slightly hoarse. "I've heard you have an unusual cat," he said, his gaze sweeping over Leo. Madame Claire frowned but invited him in, though she remained cautious. The man introduced himself as Julien, a collector of antiquities, and inquired about Leo's origins. "I once saw eyes like those in an old painting in Florence," he said. "It belonged to an ancient legend, the cat that guides lost souls." Elias was startled to hear mention of Florence, his hometown. Julien went on to explain that the legend spoke of an immortal cat that had appeared throughout the centuries, leading people to their fate. "If it's true, this cat is worth a fortune," Julien added, his eyes gleaming with greed. Madame Claire scoffed. "Leo is not for sale. He chooses us, we do not choose him." After Julien left, Elias felt uneasy. He asked Madame Claire, "Do you believe that story?" She looked at Leo and replied, "I don't know. But I do know that Leo belongs to no one but himself." Chapter 7: A Farewell. That morning, Paris woke to a rare day without rain. pale sunlight pierced through the gray clouds, casting a silvery shimmer over the Seine. Elias stood in his small room in Madame Claire's home, packing up the few belongings he had gathered over the past week: an old paintbrush she had given him, a sketchbook filled with rough drawings of Leo and the Parisian alleyways, and, of course, the painting under the streetlight, his proudest work to date. Carefully, he rolled it up and wrapped it in oil paper to protect it from the damp weather. Madame Claire stood at the door, holding a small cloth bag. "Here's some bread and cheese for the road," she said, her voice as warm as ever. "You're still young, Elias, but I see an old sorrow in your eyes. Let Paris heal it, even if just a little." Elias smiled and accepted the bag. He didn't know how to express his gratitude. In just a short week, she had not only given him shelter but had also taught him how to see the world through the eyes of a true artist, not just to paint with his eyes, but with his heart. He stepped into the living room, where Leo lay sprawled on an armchair near the fireplace, his green eyes half closed as if dreaming. Elias knelt down and gently ran his fingers through the cat's sleek black fur. "Thank you, little one," he murmured. "Without you, I'd probably still be wandering out there, or worse, I would have given up and gone back to Florence." Leo yawned, stretched, then leaped down onto the floor, flicking his tail as if in response. Elias chuckled. He wasn't sure if the cat truly understood him, or if it was just his imagination. Madame Claire stepped beside him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Leo chose you, and he never chooses wrong," she said, her eyes shining with absolute certainty. "I don't know where you'll go next, Prague, Vienna, or somewhere even farther, but if you ever need him, Leo will find you. He always has his ways." Elias nodded, though doubt lingered in his mind. Leo was just a cat. No matter how special, how could he possibly appear in far-off places? But after everything he had experienced, Elias wasn't so sure anymore. Before leaving, he hugged Madame Claire. She was small and fragile in his arms, yet he could feel a quiet strength radiating from her, the strength of someone who had endured life's hardships yet still kept a warm heart. "Thank you for everything," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. "I won't forget Paris, I won't forget you, and I certainly won't forget Leo." She patted his back gently and smiled. "Go on, young artist. The world is waiting for your paintings." Elias picked up his bag and stepped into the narrow alley leading to the Seine. He glanced back one last time. Madame Claire stood at the doorstep, waving softly, while Leo sat on the windowsill, his green eyes watching him. The wind carried the faint scent of dried lavender from the flower pots by the door. As he turned away, stepping into the thin mist veiling the streets, he heard a distant meow, a farewell from Leo. He smiled and held his painting tighter. Paris had changed him, and he knew his journey had only just begun. But after taking a few steps, an odd feeling stirred in his heart. He turned back once more. Leo had disappeared from the windowsill. Only the dim glow of the street lamp illuminated the empty alleyway. Elias shook his head, telling himself it was just his imagination, then continued walking, carrying the strange tale of the mysterious cat within him. Chapter 8: Footsteps in the Fog. 2 months had passed since Elias left Paris. He had arrived in Prague, the city of ancient stone bridges and red rooftops glowing under the sunset. The atmosphere here was entirely different from Paris, colder, drier, but carrying a melancholic beauty that resonated with the heart of an artist like him. Elias rented a small room near Stermesto Square, where the chimes of the astronomical clock rang steadily every hour, reminding him of the passage of time. That evening, in the late autumn breeze, golden leaves drifted through the narrow streets. Elias stood in the square, his easel set up before him, brush in hand, yet unsure where to begin. He wanted to paint the famous Charles Bridge, but the twilight was too dim, and the crowds of tourists distracted him. With a sigh, he set down his brush, that familiar emptiness rising again, the same feeling that had driven him away from Florence in search of something new. Suddenly, from a distance, a familiar sound echoed. "Meow!" Elias startled, turning quickly. Under the dim glow of an old street lamp, Leo appeared. The small black cat stepped out of the shadows, its sleek fur untainted by dust, its emerald eyes glowing as they locked onto his. Elias froze, nearly dropping his brush. "Leo? Is that really you?" he murmured, his voice trembling with shock and a hint of fear. The cat let out a soft sound, walked towards him, and rubbed its head against his leg as if they had never been apart. Kneeling down, Elias ran his fingers through Leo's warm fur. "How did you get here?" he whispered, though deep down, he knew there was no answer. Prague was hundreds of miles away from Paris. There was no way an ordinary cat could have traveled such a distance. He recalled Madame Claire's words. "If you need him, Leo will find you." But did he truly need Leo now? He wasn't lost, he wasn't starving, he was simply lost within himself. Leo gazed up at him, let out a short meow, then turned and began to walk away, its tail flicking as if beckoning him to follow. Elias hesitated. He looked at his easel, at the Charles Bridge, then back at the cat slipping into a narrow alley. "All right, I'll follow you," he muttered, slinging his easel over his shoulder and stepping away from the bustling crowd. Leo led him through the winding streets of Prague, past old houses leaning as if whispering secrets to one another. They passed a small market, its stalls nearly empty, the scent of freshly baked trudelnik, cinnamon sugar pastries, lingering in the air. Leo didn't stop. It continued through a wooden footbridge over the Vltava River, where the water shimmered softly in the twilight. Finally, they arrived at an old house, its stained glass window cracked, its brick walls covered in moss. Leo sat down, let out a long meow, and the wooden door creaked open. A middle-aged man stepped out, his disheveled hair and worn sweater making him look like he belonged to the house itself. In one hand, he held a battered violin. He looked at Elias, then at Leo, and frowned. "Did that cat bring you here?" he asked, his deep voice carrying a hint of a Czech accent. Elias nodded, still unsure of what was happening. The man sighed, pushing the door open wider. "Come in. My name is Karel. It seems you're the next one he's chosen." Elias stepped inside, carrying his easel and a heart full of curiosity. The room was cluttered yet warm, filled with old musical instruments, violins, cellos, even a dust-covered piano. Karel set down his violin and poured Elias a glass of deep red wine from an unlabeled bottle. "I used to be a musician," he said, his gaze distant. "But now, I only play for myself. That cat, he came here years ago, bringing a young woman with him. She needed music to heal, and I needed someone to remind me I was still alive." Elias listened, sensing an inexplicable connection between Karel's story and Madame Claire's. He glanced at Leo, now curled up near the fireplace, and wondered, "Who are you, Leo? And what do you want me to find here?" That night, he slept on the floor, lulled by the sound of Karel's violin, a sorrowful lullaby drifting through the air. He dreamed of Parisian alleyways, golden streetlights, and emerald eyes leading him ever deeper into the mist. By morning, Leo was gone. But as Elias looked at his easel, a new idea emerged, a painting of the Charles Bridge, not bathed in daylight, but shrouded in fog, with the silhouette of a black cat guiding the way. Smiling, he picked up his brush. A new journey had begun.